In the Outer Rim territories, within the Horusite system, around the star, Horusite is the planet Korriban, the world that screams the loudest for those who can hear the dark side's voice. The original homeworld of the Sith species, a humanoid people driven by hunger and rage with tough skins ranging from crimson to obsidian and clawed hands and feet. In addition, 2 thick fleshy tendrils hang from their cheeks or jaws, and 2 more tendrils protrude from their temples. Despite the fact that their civilization was very sophisticated, they perpetually engaged in warfare. However, they did not see their actions as cruel or barbaric, but as fundamental elements of existence. A notable aspect of their culture was their participation in seemingly primitive rituals, including the sacrifice of beings to honor their deities. The consequences of their continuous conflicts was the development of an extremely xenophobic society. War was literally a concept on a par with peace or serenity. Conceptually, the Sith people did not differentiate one state from the other. One of the things to consider was that the Sith had already discovered the depths of the power of the Force, especially the mainlining of rage and revenge that led to the dark side. King Sith refers to a title held by certain rulers of the Sith species. The Sith had a hierarchical structure where Sith kings held positions of power and authority. They were typically individuals who demonstrated exceptional mastery of the Force, particularly of the dark side, and were among the users of the Force. The most powerful of their time, they possessed formidable abilities and knowledge of Sith teachings. The position of the Sith King was not based simply on lineage or hereditary succession, but rather on personal strength and the individual's ability to seize and hold power. King Sith wielded authority over Sith Lords and other Sith individuals. They were known for their cruelty and cunning, employing dark-sided techniques and manipulation to reach their goals and maintain their dominance. Later in their history, those who bore the title of Sith Lord became relatively common. But in thousands of years of their existence, the Sith had only one supreme monarch, King Adas. Among the various Sith warriors who relentlessly commanded Sith tribes, they moved like predators on arid terrain, measuring strengths, establishing hierarchies with blood and violence. No tribe yielded an inch of ground without a fight. No leader could show weakness without being immediately challenged. The law of the strongest. It was in this unforgiving world where Adas, a warrior whose name would first be whispered with suspicion, to later provoke a fear that bordered on reverence. Something about him was different. He was not just another tribal leader, but something that seemed to emerge from the very shadows of Korriban, carrying a destiny that few could understand and no one could stop. Born on Korriban, in an era prior to the existence of the Republic itself, approximately 300 years before, Adas came into the world marked by an extraordinary physical distinction that would become a harbinger of his future greatness. His skin, a deep and rich obsidian that differentiated him from other red Sith. This was a clear sign for the Sith sages to understand that Adas was destined for great things. The Sith society of this ancient era was fractured, a set of competing tribes scattered across the harsh planet. Each tribe was a sovereign entity, fiercely protective of its territories. Constant conflict was the norm, a brutal dance of survival where strength and cunning determined supremacy. It was in this perfect scenario where Adas began his remarkable journey. Adas's mastery aptitudes, both in combat skills and in the intricate mysteries of Sith sorcery, were astonishing. But above all, something that characterized him was his weaponry. Adas wore an imposing and spectacular ebon armor, and in his hand he wielded his devastating weapon of choice. His enormous axe, imbued with powerful Sith magic that seemed to absorb the light from its surroundings. An uncommon weapon, an extension of Adas himself, with a colossal size that caused terror to any adversary who was on the battlefield alongside the Sith, but not on his side. The axe became synonymous with his reputation. The moment of his final triumph came when Adas achieved what no Sith leader had ever accomplished. the complete unification of the fractured tribes, the total unification of the Sith. Through a combination of unprecedented martial prowess and manipulation of Sith magic knowledge, he systematically conquered and consolidated tribal territories. Reign of the Axe was what the period of Adas's reign, now king, was called. His feat was not simply political, it was almost mystical. He achieved what no leader before had accomplished, transforming a handful of enemy tribes into a single people with a common purpose. His name began to resonate not as that of a conqueror, but as something more. It was then that his people, all the Sith, recognized in him something more than a king. He was the Sith'ari, the prophesied being, the one who would come to elevate his people from fragmentation to absolute unity. It was not just a title, it was a destiny. The impact of King Adas was such that the term Sith'ari would become legendary thousands of years later, representing not only leadership, but a messianic concept of supreme Sith potential. Adas embodied this perfectly, a ruler who was simultaneously a warrior, a leader, and a unifying spiritual force. The prophecy of the Sith mystics could not have been more accurate. That obsidian-skinned being, marked from birth as a chosen one, would soon demonstrate that his destiny transcended the limits of the unification of his people. When the shadows of enemies never before seen covered the arid horizon of Korriban, it was then that King Adas understood that his true challenge was just beginning. The Infinite Empire at that time was the greatest force in the galaxy. It was one of the most advanced and powerful empires of any chronological era. They had unique technology, the most advanced at that time, which allowed them to conquer world after world, and unfortunately for the Sith, the Rakata had targeted Korriban. Initially, the misshapen Force-sensitive beings invaders appeared harmless to the Sith, trying to build trust. They even taught Adas the art of preserving his essence within a device called Holocron. Using this new knowledge, Adas created his own Holocron, which became more a testament to his achievement than an instructional tool. However, as time passed, the Rakata became bolder in their actions, and their true intentions were soon revealed, causing Adas's forces to rise up against them. The sky of Korriban was completely covered when the Rakata ships descended, machines of metal and fire that defied all understanding. Their angular forms cast immense shadows over the rocky surface of the planet, an omen of destruction against the brutality of the Sith. However, the Sith were not just another species the Rakata could take advantage of. They were ready to face their invaders. Thousands of red-skinned Sith warriors were formed, their bodies marked by scars that told stories of past battles, each wound caused by another Sith, in disputes over territories and in rivalries that now no longer mattered, as those same warriors who had once fought each other were now united. The Sith had a common enemy, a threat that transcended any previous tribal dispute. There was no fear in their eyes, only an inner fire that burned more intensely than any external threat. Those who were once enemies were now brothers in arms, willing to die for one another against an invader that threatened their world. With their weapons pointing at the darkened sky, they never trembled nor retreated. The Rakata ships began to descend. The ground vibrated with their arrival, but the Sith remained motionless, unbreakable, and emerging from the shadows of his own myth, embodying everything that represented being a Sith, an imposing shadow rose amid legions of red-skinned warriors. King Adas, encased in majestic ebon warrior armor, emerged as the focal point of the resistance, and in his hand he held his weapon, his alchemically forged battle axe, of a size larger than that of a man, reflecting a dark glow that seemed to absorb light itself. Adas's name began as a whisper, a barely audible vibration among the ranks of warriors. First one, then another, and then thousands. The cry spread like a shockwave, a roar that seemed to spring from the very bowels of Korriban. It was not a simple clamor. It was the pulse of a people who had left behind their differences, who had found in a single name the promise of their survival. Every Sith warrior shouted it with all their being. King Aras did not need to turn around. He knew his people were with him. Each shout was a promise. The Rakata attacked in an excessive manner. Their advanced weapons were used to easily pulverize rock, but the Sith did not retreat. Each attack was answered with an avalanche of bodies, with shouts of defiance that made the mountains themselves tremble. Aras advanced like a storm of darkness, despite the years, burning with the same fury of his youth. His axe, more than a weapon, was an extension of his will, cutting through the Rakata ranks as if death itself had taken form. Sith bodies covered the ground, but for each casualty, the Sith managed to bring down more Rakata. The king managed to capture Rakata starships, giving way to countless Sith to delve into this new technology. The same machines that came to destroy them now roared against their creators. Aras not only defended, he transformed, and after hijacking the ships of his invaders, and spread his Sith civilization from Korriban to neighboring worlds, paving the way for new generations of Sith to mark new territories. The battle was not just weapons against weapons, but of dark wills clashing. Where the Rakata manipulated fear, the Sith embodied it. Where the invaders channeled hatred, Aras and his people were hatred itself materialized. And so, the impossible happened. The great infinite empire, the conquerors of gods, were expelled by the unleashed fury of a people united under the banner of their dark king. The shadows of nightfall crept over an unrecognizable Korriban, where temples and cities once stood. Now, only smoldering ruins and craters marking the ferocity of a legendary battle remained. The air was charged with the echo of a victory that tasted like ash. The Rakata, the empire that had subjugated the galaxy, had been expelled, but the price had been high. The sacred land of the Sith was destroyed, and their greatest leader, King Aras, lay lifeless among the rubble of his final triumph. At the culminating moment of his victory, Aras had liberated his people beyond Korriban. He had traced new horizons for the Sith. He had unified his people, had defended them against the invincible. His last breath was a promise, a legacy carved into the history of his people. The shadows of Korriban seemed to bow to his last breath. Aras did not die. He only became myth.